Hi guys, and welcome to another digital painting tutorial. Today we'll be going over how to paint this wildflower meadow landscape. Welcome to my channel, Creatively Me with Bree. You guessed it, I'm Bree. Be sure to pause so that you can get the specs of the canvas that we'll be working on today. On the first layer provided, we're going to select a grayish green, and we're just going to drag it over onto the canvas and it'll automatically fill. Add a new blank layer and then go over to colors and select a grayish light green. Continue to select various colors that are just slightly darker and move your way down the canvas like I am here. This does not have to be exact or perfect, as you can see right here. I'm just trying to get various colors down to create a gradient so that when we blur the background, we can start to get a sense of what is up close versus what is off in the distance. Going to the spray paints brush set, I pick out Flicks. Staying on the color that we used in the midground, we are just going to go over on a new layer, just putting in these little flecks and then putting it on multiply and then heading on over to Gaussian blur. And then now you can see that this is going to start providing, again, more context for a field of flowers. Then I'm going on a new layer and going into the splatter and using that same color again, that mid-tone from the middle ground in the background, and I'm going to blur it. So that way we get more depth, more contrast, understanding of what is up close versus what's in the middle versus what's far away. With a medium dark green, again, we're going to add more flecks on a new layer, slightly darker than last time. And then we're going to put multiply. Once we hit multiply, I noticed there was just a few spots that needed a little bit more, so I added it, creating a lot of depth. So now you really can tell there's the foreground versus the background and the middle ground. Grabbing a lighter color in that monochromatic range that we've been working in, I go into organic brush set and then I grab spires and put that just along the bottom, and then I take the opacity down. Grabbing an even lighter color, I'm going to go back to spray paints and pick Flicks, and then I'm just going to vary up the size and tap in towards the top and maybe just a little bit in the middle, and just a touch at that bottom there. And I'm going to use Gaussian blur again. Everyone's piece will look a little bit different, so don't be afraid to play around with the settings. Next, I want to go into the blending modes and I'm going to put add on, and I decided that this was a little bit too vibrant, so I go in with the Gaussian blur one more time and just lighten it up just a touch. On a new layer, I add more of the Flicks brush in a foresty green color, using a blending mode of color dodge and then blurring that using the Gaussian blur. I'm going to jump a little bit ahead here so that I can show you how I selected my color for the flower. Since the background contains mostly monochromatic colors, I go ahead and select a color from the back. And in classic mode, I use the sliders to get the color as much in the center as possible. Next, I go into harmony, and I'm currently in analogous, but I want to go with split complementary, and I pick the color that I would like to see the most, and that was more of like a peachy salmon color. So I increased the color and it just wasn't bright enough, so I just pulled it out just a little bit as carefully as possible to get the color that I was most looking for that would be complementary to the background itself. Now we're going to go over how to get those shapes. So these are my own brushes that I made, and I'm going to show you how to make a similar brush yourself. I'm going to select all of these layers and group them together by swiping to the right. That's how you select them. And then here's an example of the brush. I'm going to add a new layer to actually draw on. I'm going to pick a hard airbrush so that the lines are nice and crisp. I'm going to move my example up to the corner so we can still see it. And now I'm going to draw in gray. It's a medium gray, and just get the floral elements down. My objective was to create silhouettes, and so I just wanted to make sure that I had petals that were distinctly different and in various sizes. Once I have that established, I'm going to hide the background piece. The layer which I drew this on, I'm going to press copy, and then I'm going to go down to organics where I'm going to add it. And now I'm going to go to shape in my brush studio. In the shape editor, I'm going to paste. There it is. Hit done so you can see how it looks. And we need to make some changes. First, let's go over into stroke path. Let's turn up the spacing as well as the jitter. Next, we're going to go into, there we go, properties. We just want to make sure that this is a little bit bigger as well as that. Then we're going to go into dynamics, make sure there's a size jitter, so that way they're not all the same size and identical. I just cleared so that we could see in various colors what it's starting to look like. Next, travel back to the shape of the brush, and we want to work on the shape properties. This is me just playing around for a second, sort of trying to determine how I want it to look. I don't want it randomized because I don't want there to be upside down flowers, but I do want there to be a variation. So I do put on the flip X axis, and then I also do just slight rotation. So that way they are just slightly more tilted one way or the other. Then I'm also going to go into the blend mode, and I'm going to pick height, so that they're extremely solid in color. I don't want them to have too much variation in terms of opacity. Now that I have these, I can get rid of them or hide them. And I'm going to show an example of what it looks like. This is, the ways in which it can look with varying sizes. And now this brush is ready for us to use in order to create background flower elements or floral elements into our landscape. On a new layer, I already have my color selected. I have my new brush that we just made, and I'm just going to tap in various sizes to create, the smallest at the top, the medium sizes in the middle, and the largest ones closer to the front so that we create depth. Right now they're all one color, but we will fix that in just a few moments. But now we're going to use the Gaussian blur. We don't want it too blurred because we want them to still stand out. On a new layer, I'm going to pick a slightly darker, rustier salmon color, maybe like a smoked salmon versus just like salmon. And just going to tap in, and where I don't want them, I'm just going to select, move them down, and rotate just to give it a little bit, and enlarge it. And as everything else, we are going to go into Gaussian blur and blur it. There's definitely a pattern to this in case you haven't noticed. I felt like the top of the piece was just looking a little too gray, so I went and I grabbed a mint green from the same, monochromatic color, and I, on a new layer, draw across the top. I put on a color blending mode, and I actually go to color blending at the bottom. And then I take down the color of that just a little bit to get that pink to come through. But now you'll be able to tell that it just is a little bit more green and not as gray in the background. And I just felt like that would do much better for the overall finished piece. So now we're going to grab a drawing brush called Blackburn. Here's an example of what it looks like. It has a little bit of texture, and I think that goes well with the background, so I'm using that to create some stems. They will not look like this forever. And I add them in various colors, usually from the mid and lighter tones, since the forefront of this piece is dark. Using too dark of a color won't really show up. And then I use, you guessed it, Gaussian blur. Grabbing the selection tool, I will use the freeform to select the bottom of those stems, and I just darken them after I feather it so that they blend in with the foreground a little bit better and don't stand out too much. All right, grab another new layer, grab a orangish brown, something much darker than some of the colors already on there. And I'm just going to create the center of a few of the flowers just to make them seem like they're all facing in different directions. So some are facing us, and so we can see the center of them, and they're more open and bloomed. And so then we use Gaussian blur again. On a new layer, picking that salmon color, going back to Blackburn, we are going to brush. With this particular brush, you do want to paint from bottom to the top in order to get these brush strokes to look this way. If you brush the other way, the brush strokes go in a different direction. I moved the floral element around the petals just so that way they rested in a place on the canvas where it was a little bit darker so it could stand out more. And on a new layer, I ended up painting this second floral element as well. On another new layer, this is where I'm going to go in with a reddish brown and I'm going to create the center of the flower that we are making. I would personally call these coneflowers. And I'm just creating a little bit of color variation at the top. It's more than a little color variation. It's quite stark, but I'm creating 3 different colors, and I'm not worried too much about how it looks because we will be blending them together soon. So it's more just getting the general highlights and shadow down, as well as the middle color there too. So I'm going to go back to the flower petals, and I'm going to put on Alpha Lock. I did unfortunately grab the wrong flower, so when I go to draw, nothing happens. So I go back in. I also put the other layer on Alpha Lock and make sure I'm on the correct layer. And now I can draw without worrying about the brush strokes going off of the flower petals themselves. And I'm just getting, again, the highlights, or not the highlights, the shadows, and then the highlights established. Super exhilarating, I know. Try and keep in mind of like what flower will stand out more and where the light will hit it. This flower that we're working on will have more light than the other one because the other one's lower to the ground, which means it's actually going to be a little bit darker and less prominent. Now, I made this brush. I'm actually making a new one. So we're going to duplicate the flat brush, go into grain. There we go, source library. I pick one of the first textures that I see. There we go. I like that grain. Now, I could use it this way, but what I really wanted was more texture to it. So I went and I did the textured option. And I work on the scale and just play around until I see what I like, which I like. And now I'm going to use that as a smudge tool. And I'm going to start smudging those colors together. I call it blending. It is a smudge tool, but I'm blending the colors. That's what I would say I'm doing. Now I'm going to take this smudge tool to the petals, and I'm going to focus mostly on the petal shape first. Then I'll worry about the colors that are on the petal itself. But I want to make sure that the petal is blending well into the center of the flower, as well as that the petals at the bottom are smudging with texture in a way that I like. As usual, I'm zooming in and out so that I can see how it's looking from afar, because it's really easy to get caught in the details when it's up close. And I'm just going to add in just a tiny bit more detail, just so it doesn't all get lost. Grab that lightest color and just create some little dotted texture. So we get to preserve, the shapes, but still keep the really nice smudged look about it. And I felt like I sort of lost the petals here, so I just made sure that I smudged the petals back in there, and then I even drew on top just to make sure that we kept that shape there. And while we're just watching me do this, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. If you haven't engaged, by all means, engagement is great. Helps the channel grow so I can continue to do cool stuff like this. We're getting so close to done with this piece. All right, now I'm going in and just smudging and making sure that I'm painting in where there needs to be some details. Okay, we're almost there, guys. How exciting. All right, I am using the selection freeform, and I'm grabbing the parts of the petals that I think would be darker, and I feather. Make sure you feather that line. Now that you have that done, we can go in with a new layer underneath the petals, and we're going to pick a really dark green. Make sure it's vibrant, and we're going to draw some really harsh lines. We're going to duplicate that layer, we're going to put it on Alpha Lock, and then we're going to pick a really vibrant green, and we are going to fill that layer. Take off the Alpha Lock, go to Gaussian Blur, and it's going to look a little weird at first, but we want to blur it out so that it kind of gives this like highlighting effect, this glow around the stem. And then we're going to go to the stem and we are going to smudge it using an airbrush. We don't want to take it away, but we do want it to not be too established of a line. And next, I decided that the middle ground needed a little bit more green. So I picked a layer that was underneath some of the texture, drew a nice airbrush across, and then I just go ahead and I pick a blending mode, which I chose overlay, and then I use the blur. And I thought it was too green, so I went for a little bit more blue in there. And now you can sort of see what it looks with and without it. Going to the top layer where those flower petals are, I add a new layer and I pick like a mint colored green. Then I go to elements brushes and driven snow, and I create this light element, sort of like particles of light in the air. And then I use overlay as the blending mode and duplicate that layer because I really wanted the light to feel vibrant and just really bright and obvious. Under the petals, I grab the stem layer again, and I just use Gaussian blur at 4%, I think it was, to get those just slightly out of focus. And here is the final product. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. Please make sure that you subscribe, and I will see you in the next tutorial.